ahead and hit the red button.
All right, perfect. So first I want to thank for having me here and joining your user group. A little bit about myself. My name is Vukašin Terzić. I live between California and Czech Republic. I'm currently in Prague, Czech Republic. I work as a solution architect in a consulting company. And I'm currently focusing mostly on Azure projects, but I come from operations background and I spent years implementing Active Directory and server infrastructures. And today's session is about combining two technologies that changed my professional life completely. And those are PowerShell and Azure. I've worked with PowerShell for many years now. I remember how I learned PowerShell, and that was from a need. I started working in a school with about 500, 600 students. And my first task was to create like 400 new accounts and emails as well. And so I learned PowerShell. And everything changed for me. And then Azure came up and I started learning Azure, and then again everything changed. And so today we will see how to use PowerShell in Azure and particularly in Azure DevOps. But before we get to Azure, let's just take a look, or how do we typically run PowerShell and PowerShell scripts. So on premises, we can run it on our client, on our computer that we are using. That can be PowerShell core, as well as the Windows PowerShell. And that we all know that the PowerShell core is now multi-platform, so we can run it on a Linux, Mac. I have a Mac, I run PowerShell on Mac every day. Then we can run it on a server. That can be a management server, it can be like a domain controller, or it can be a server that we are currently configuring with PowerShell directly or remotely. And then there are other options, like those are not that typical scenarios and places where you can run PowerShell, but for example, you can do it in a browser. I was even running it on a network switch that was Linux based. And then we have Azure. And so Azure is from very beginning, it was PowerShell friendly from very beginning. And one of the ways is to run it inside of Azure VM. And that allows you to use Windows or Linux server in Azure. You can install dependencies, you can install your modules, you can install and use your favorite editor like ISC or VS Code, everything like that. However, if you decide to run it like this inside of a VM, it will not automatically authenticate you against your Azure subscription. So inside of your scripts, you will have to run the authentication. And also, this is not the most cost-friendly way. Usually Azure VMs are expensive. And if you need to run one full time just because you need to run a Azure or PowerShell scripts, then you're doing something wrong. Then we have Azure Cloud Shell, and that's from your browser. It's a little window that shows up in a Azure portal, or you can also use it from an app. And this gives you quick access to PowerShell core shell that is already logged into your subscription. And it's perfect if you want to run some checks on your Azure, if you need to, for example, find out some information, quickly deploy some new services, and so on. But it's not a typical place from where you will run your scripts to automate something on a schedule. Yes, from Cloud Shell, you can also have multi-line code, but it's not very convenient to use it in that way. And for that, luckily, we have Azure automation accounts. And so those are great because you can create your scripts inside of automation account and save it as runbooks. And for that, you can it's made to allow us to run PowerShell scripts or any other scripts. And we can also create secrets, save them, and then run same script in the different ways with different parameters. You can also connect it to, let's say, Key Vault and pull the secrets from there. You can use different modules, and your scripts can have access to your contacts inside of your Azure. But if you use it in combination with the Azure Hybrid Worker, then you can have it execute things on premises as well. Another good thing about Azure Automation Account is that you can also have those runbooks accessible from different Azure services, an easy way. And so if you use, for example, Azure Site Recovery or Azure Update Management, you can use those runbooks as a pre or post tasks and automate things in this way. And I really like using Azure Automation Account. It's a very powerful tool, and we can also like build entire Azure environment from there or destroy it if you need. So that's a great stuff. But today's presentation is not about the Azure Automation Account. Another place where we can run Azure or PowerShell in Azure is Azure App Service. And that works only with PowerShell Core. But it's not meant to be a tool for us running our normal day-to-day tasks. It's more for like application we build, and we can run it inside of the app service. We don't get to use, we don't have interactive shell or interactive console that we can see the results. And it can also generate some extra cost. So it's not a tool for everyday use. And then there is Azure DevOps. And that's what we are going to talk about today. But first, in the beginning, I want to come clear with something. I'm not a developer, and the way I use PowerShell in Azure or in Azure DevOps is not what DevOps philosophy is all about. And it's important to understand that, because if you are a DevOps engineer, you will probably see that the way that we are going to use it here is not following the philosophy of DevOps. And I can say that in general, it doesn't apply. Those philosophies, they don't apply to ops only people. But Azure DevOps Suite contains many automation tools and components, and we can use those, especially if we are already working with Azure or we like automating things with some kind of shell. And I'm here to talk about those tools, how we can use them and abuse them, and not about the cultural aspect of DevOps itself. So in Azure DevOps, we have, let's say, 5 main tools. And we are today mostly interested about Azure pipelines. However, when we log in and do the demo, which will be in a minute, I think I'm going to cover few more of those tools so you can see the full picture and how we are going to use it. Right. So I said that DevOps PowerShell is not, and they are not in the same philosophy. So why should we use it? Why should we use PowerShell inside of the Azure DevOps? Well, first thing, when you try to run any kind of code or build, let's say build, execute the pipeline in Azure, you get every run documented. And that's a great benefit. And you don't realize that until you try to, or until you get used to it, and then you try to simulate that and create that kind of logging mechanism on your own, and you find out that it's very difficult and it takes time. Every time when you execute PowerShell in a way that I'm going to show you inside of the Azure DevOps, you will know what version of code was run, when it was executed, on which version of PowerShell, on which version of operating system, on dependencies such as module. You will have everything documented for you automatically without need to do anything. And also you will see what was the outcome, what was the result, like what files, if you generate any files, what files were generated during that particular run. And we can even use it to store our logs and temporary files. And those are easy to find for each individual run that happened for you. So that was a fantastic benefit. And since I discovered this, I started using it automatically. The other benefit is that, and this is from DevOps philosophy, is that when you create a build pipeline and you execute the code, there is a higher probability that code will work. And that's because first, if you collaborate with multiple people on the project, you want to keep it clean, you want to keep everything commented. Then in DevOps itself, we will be making small changes and delivering it faster to production. That will, making small changes is less possibility that there will be a bug. And if there is a bug, then it's easier to find out where it is. So that's for us, doesn't make that much sense, but also when you have a code that is being executed inside of the Azure DevOps, but usually you will introduce some tests, and if all those tests pass, then you can consider that your code is actually working. And if this is happening automatically on a schedule every day, hundreds of times, then it's easy for you to say or to be confident that the code is working because it happened many times and you have everything documented that it worked many times. So that's another benefit. And then there's a cost. I already mentioned that you can run PowerShell inside of the Azure VM, but that will cost you hundreds of dollars per month. Yes, you can make a schedule to turn it off when it's not needed, but still you're going to pay something. Azure DevOps organization, when you register, which I'm going to show you shortly, allows you to have 30 hours per month of free build agent runtime. What that means for us is that the execution time is 30. If it's less than 30 hours per month, we get to use it completely for free. And so if you have a script that you need to do something with on a schedule, and that runs once a day and it finishes in 10-15 minutes, you are never going to reach the limit and you will always have it for free. Great. I will come back to the build agent a little bit later. So that's another thing. Also, if you create a public project, which is publicly accessible, then you have it completely for free. And that's great if you're doing some testing, but you don't have some code that contains some information, or it's a code that you want to protect. So that's why. And it all sounds great, right? So we should be using it all the time. Well, not really. You shouldn't be using DevOps or PowerShell inside of the Azure DevOps for things like one-line code or like day tasks. But it works great when you need to run something on schedule, and that's what I use it for. For example, I don't know, identity management script. I'm guessing everyone who is dealing with Active Directory or some kind of Azure Active Directory and Office 365 licenses and things like that already have implemented some kind of identity management solution. And PowerShell is a great tool for that because you can work with those identities. You can create new accounts, delete accounts, and so on. And that's something that will run on when it's triggered by something, or on a schedule, let's say every 2 hours or every day or something like that. And for me, that means that I have to have a management server that will execute this script, right? If you're on premises, then okay, you can have a management server, but in Azure, you want to avoid that. And having Azure DevOps as a tool where you can run it in a serverless container that you don't have to pay for because it's less than 30 hours and it's free, then that's a huge benefit. And when you start creating it, you you will realize that there are not so many like not dependencies, but limitations actually. So you will find a way, or I found a way to run anything that I run on on-premises server to execute it successfully in Azure DevOps. So that's a great benefit for me. Then another another situation when we should be using or we can be using PowerShell in Azure DevOps is at the moment when you have to when your client inside of which you need to run it has some special requirements. And by that, for example, it can be operating system requirements. And I have like a PowerShell module that we use in my company. And I have to make sure that it works on an older version of operating systems. So that means that I need to be able to run it and test it as well on Windows Server 2008 that's still supported in Azure, and we still need it to be functional in that operating system. Also on, let's say, Mac or Linux. And having all those different servers somewhere so I can just test the execution of one simple script on them will be very time consuming and very like expensive for me because I will have to have some lab somewhere, and if I don't have a server, I will have to pay for those in Azure. In Azure DevOps, there are different types of operating systems supported, and you can choose which one you want. And this happens for you automatically. So that's another great reason to start using Azure DevOps. And then also what this is good for is if you are using Azure Pipeline, that's good. That's a great tool for wrapping up like larger workflow. So if you have something that's combining PowerShell with something else, like let's say ARM templates or Terraform or some other infrastructure as a code tools, this is also a great part for it because, and that's what we are going to talk about next, is the Azure Pipeline allows you to work with the multiple programming languages at the same time, and also different types of shell. So we can also execute like bash or batch scripts as well. And that's how. So the how is using Azure Pipeline to execute our PowerShell and have access to all of those benefits that I mentioned earlier. So before we start using that, let's talk a little bit about what Azure Pipeline actually is. I'm not sure how everyone is or aware of how build pipeline works, but and what they are. But Azure Pipeline, for what we are going to use it, is cloud-hosted pipeline that supports many operating systems, programming languages, and platforms. And most of those options that are there are behind or like more than what we need to use for our PowerShell. So we are just going to use a tiny bit of it. But once you start exploring and creating more complicated projects, some of those options will actually be very useful later on. What's important for us, and I already mentioned that, is that we can choose from a different operating system. And the operating system is the system of the agent. It's called build agent. And that's the container that is running in the background. And we are actually executing our code inside of that container. And here's how we can choose inside of the pipeline which container we want to use. It also supports PowerShell and PowerShell Core, and we can select which version we want to use. We can select 5.1, 6.2, 7. We can select that. However, if we choose Linux or Mac container, it's always going to be PowerShell Core. It's not going to let us choose Windows PowerShell 5.1 because that's for Windows only. If we choose Windows Server, for example, Server 2019, then we can basically select which one we want. Okay. Maybe I can say that Azure Pipeline can natively run PowerShell Batch and Bash, and you can get, I think my opinion is that you can get just about anything done when using one or more of those scripting languages. But we are going to stick with PowerShell because that's why we are here. Right. And so how do you run the PowerShell code inside of the Azure DevOps pipeline? There are a couple of ways. First, we can run it as a one-line or as a multi-line script, or we can create a PowerShell task. And what are those tasks? Well, tasks are basically the building blocks of Azure DevOps pipelines. There are many built-in tasks, and we can also download other tasks via an extension and have it saved in our Azure DevOps. And this can be downloaded from Marketplace. And PowerShell has there are a few different PowerShell tasks that are already built in and we don't have to install anything. Or we can run a PowerShell from a file. And the easiest way to do this is to have this file saved in a source control repository. And such as, for example, I don't know, Azure Repo or GitHub or anything else. And you can have them store in a multiple repositories as well and check out all of them if needed. Also, and I tried this because there was a specific situation. So it's not, Microsoft doesn't show you a guide for it, but I tested it and I can say it works, is to have your file saved not in a repo, but in a storage account inside of Azure, and also in virtual machines on the file if you want. And that's not really recommended because it gives you a lot of extra, or you need to do a lot of extra work, but it's doable. You just need to grant access to your pipeline. And before actually running the code, you need to create a task to download the code and then you can run it. So enough of talking. Let's show. So what I'm going to do here now is to start with DevOps from beginning. And my demo is not going to be, I'm not going to execute any difficult PowerShell scripts. I'm going to show you how to work with PowerShell inside of the Azure DevOps. And then you will find a way how to run your own individual scripts. Right. So and please, if you have any questions, raise your hand or something. I don't know if there is a chat room here in Zoom. Don't see it anywhere, but I'm sure that if you have any questions, we will be able to answer them. Okay, so now we are starting with demo, and the first thing is to go and register in Azure DevOps. So before, this was a little bit easier process, and it was not integrated with Azure. Now it is. Now you need to have an Azure subscription or an Azure tenant to do it, but it's again, it's easier to work if you already have an identity. You don't have to worry about that. You can use your identity for it. So go to dev.azure.com and you will be prompted to create a company. I have some test or not test example subscription here that I'm using, and my company is called like this, or organization rather. And inside of this organization, I'm going to create a new project. So we are going to call it demo project, very original name. And as you can see, I'm going to select private. Version control, you can choose. Those are actually not very important information for us. I'm assuming that you are not going to use Team Foundation services, but you are going to use a Git. So we create a Git project, and that's basically creating a space, virtual space for our DevOps project. And I mentioned that, or showed a picture that we have several different components in Azure DevOps, and now you can see that all those components are here. This first page is actually showing us the summary. If we have a README file in our repository, that can also here. You can also display boards, charts, different things. That's very useful if you are collaborating with different people on the same project. But for us, we are going to focus now mostly on repos and pipelines. Right, so for repository, I'm going to use Azure Repos or DevOps Repos because everything is here in one place. If you're already using GitHub, then you can completely skip this step, and I will show you later on how to connect your GitHub with Azure Pipeline, so you don't have to do this. You can see if we are now creating a first repository in our project that I can clone that in my VS Code and start using that immediately. I'm not going to do that because I don't need to connect it now to my computer. I'm just going to initialize it with a README file. And what that means is that my repository was created now. Right, and I only have a README file. That's all what I need for now. Other than that, Azure Repos is a source control that is very similar to GitHub if you are used to. And it's also free. You don't pay like for space or something like that. It's free for you to use completely. All right. So now we go to pipelines, and we don't have any pipeline, and we have to create one. When we create a pipeline, we have two options. One, now a default option is to use YAML pipeline. And then before, this was used to be a default, but now Microsoft is pushing that away and it's not being developed anymore, is the like a graphic user interface version of the editor of the Azure pipelines. And what that means is that basically you don't have to write any code. You can just select tasks from the list and use them inside of or create a pipeline from those existing tasks. Of course, that's easier, but it can be limiting because you don't have that freedom and you cannot write the code in a way that you want, but you can only like select tasks and then change their order. I never used Classic Editor for a production thing because I always run into something that was missing and I had to use the YAML. So we are going to here start using YAML, and in the first page is asking us, where is your code? So my code is in the Azure Repos. You can select anything else. If you select the GitHub, it will ask you to authenticate, create a connection string, and you will be able to access your GitHub code or all your repositories under your account from here. I'm going to select this, and because it's the same project, the same user, I don't have to authenticate. Only thing I have to select is my repository. If I had multiple of them, then I will select the one I want. Right, and now we are actually creating a pipeline. As you can see here, there are already many pre-configured pipelines. And typically, if you select like C++ or something, basically what it's already in there, the information is in there, is selecting the right type of build agent and installing all dependencies like programming language that you need and all other things. What I didn't mention is that every time when your build agent runs, unless you are using a custom agent from a custom ISO, which we are not in this demo, and it's not actually needed for us. We are running Microsoft hosted agent, and that means that every time it runs, it's a container that is built from scratch and it's clean. So, and that's the main difference from running the code in here and on your server that you already have. Because on your server, you will install like module, for example, only once. And then next time you run your script, you don't have to install module because it's already there. Or if you have some, let's say, files that you need to copy somewhere, or some libraries or some advanced things that you have in your script, or prepare environment for something, you do that once on your management server, and it's always there. In Azure DevOps, it's not there. You have to do it every single time. And luckily, PowerShell is very powerful, and it lets you prepare everything you need, like install Windows features if you need, install modules, and so on. So that is the thing that you need to think about, and that's actually adding those extra lines of code to prepare your container, your build agent for you. Okay, so we are going to start with the starter pipeline, and it creates an Azure Pipelines YAML file, and this file is automatically going to be saved in our repository. Okay, and that's also great about using YAML pipelines, is that you have your pipeline actually saved in a file, and you can then review this file and see exactly what was the configuration of the pipeline in the time when you were running it. So another great thing. And also you are able to replicate this and copy it somewhere, share it with someone, and so on. So that's why also I like YAML pipeline. However, the negative thing about it is that actually you have to learn YAML, and that's something new. And I started learning YAML in a wrong way, and please don't repeat my mistake. I started learning by doing, and it was try and failure. And believe me, there were many failures because for me, coming from PowerShell, was very difficult to start. It was very difficult to start thinking that space makes difference, and some things like, I don't know, like if it's a Linux, it's something different than if you run it on a Windows container. Quotes are can be very difficult and different that we are used to in PowerShell, and so on. And that was the wrong way of learning it. But actually, if you look at the docsmicrosoft.com, and also there is a website, Learn YAML in Y minutes, something like that. Let's see if I can find that. Learn YAML in Y minutes. Yeah, this is the website. So this is another great website, which is very short. There is not too much on it. But it explains all those difficult things that I was not able to figure it out at first. And so that's the way to start learning YAML. And once you get used to it, it's not difficult. You just need to remember a few things, and you will be able to write your YAML pipelines. Very easy. Right, so that's the introduction to YAML. I hated it in the beginning, but now I actually quite like it because I learned it and it's now easy, and I don't have anything against it. All right, so what do we see here? So this is the definition of our pipeline. And the first line that we see here is called trigger. And basically these two lines means that this job, execution of this pipeline, will be triggered every time there is a change in a master branch of our Azure repository. So every time when there is a new change committed into the repository, this pipeline will execute. We can change that, of course. We can make this pipeline run on a schedule. So that can be done. Once I save it, I will come back to that. But basically, we can write the change in here, or we can, after I save it, I will be able to show you the button. You can also do it in a configuration. The second thing that we see here is the pool, and this is the pool of our build agents, which means for us, we don't have like multiple of them. We will only have one agent, and we can select which operating system we want. If we select Ubuntu latest, it will give us the latest version of Ubuntu. If we select maybe Windows latest, it will give us the latest version of Windows Server 2019. I can select specific version and add it here, so I can run something like Server 2016 or even older than that if I want. So that's the first thing. And again, a reminder, this is where this will make a difference between Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core, because if you leave it on Ubuntu, then it will always run PowerShell Core. With Windows, we have options. Second thing, so we have few already like steps here. I'm going to leave them so they don't mind. But basically, this is exactly what I'm going to show you. But this is a script saying hello world, and then this is a multi-line script. I'm going to show you exactly the same thing with PowerShell. So we are selecting PowerShell, and I'm going to say, all right, so this is going to be my one-line script in a YAML file. Easy, right? What I like to do, and that's like now a muscle memory for me, is to add display name. And I'm going to call it like those, one line script. I will show you why display name is important in a minute, but it's not necessary. We can just leave it without that. And then I'm going to, let's say, run PowerShell Core. And this is going to be a multi-line script. Right. Oops. So these are the two ways how we can run a PowerShell inside of a pipeline. And that means that we are not calling a separate script, we are running it exactly here. And now if I execute this, my script is going to write those things and those things as well. And as you can see, the difference between one line is that we run it in one line, and with the multi-line is that I put the pipe here and then I write one command on one line. And I think it needs to be like this. Yeah. So you saw that this display name changed the color. So now I can see that it's correct. Right. So let's save this and run this, and I can show you how the script is executed. Save and run. Sorry about that. I don't know if you can see that. My monitor is trying to, okay. Basically this is committing change to the file, to the master branch of my repository. I should add a comment and the script commit message, save and run. And now it saved the file and now it's queued the job. So in our free version, we get one parallel job. So if you start paying for it, then you can run multiple parallel jobs, and that's useful if you have multiple or something that needs to be executed in parallel. Job means that you will get a container to run. You can run multiple of them and run multiple versions of scripts if you need. Our job finished in 30 seconds. And what happened is we can see, and this is a part of the documentation I was talking about. See that we had Windows latest. It was a hosted agent. It took 13 seconds to finish. First step was to check out the code. It took the code from our repository and copied it. I will show you in a second. Then those are the two scripts that we didn't write that were already there. And the display name I added is actually the name here of the task that you can see. And if I didn't do that, it will have some generic name like PowerShell, but we will not know what is it. And so I added display name, and that's why it shows here as with the name I gave it to. And so we can see that execution was on PowerShell. Right, so this was core as well. And we can see the result. No, it was PowerShell exe. Okay, so it was not core. And we can see the result. And then we can see the multi-line script was on push exe, which is a PowerShell 7. And it was executed, and those are the results. Usually we don't care about those results because you will not be running PowerShell script inside of the Azure DevOps that will have write host in it. You don't care about that because this is something that's running on the background. You only care about what that script is doing, not about what will print out. And for that purpose, you would like to have all those things that will be printed out. You want to have them saved in a log, right? And then the code was checked out and the run was finished. Okay, so that was easy, right? Now we go back to our pipelines and we can see that we had successful run. We can click on it and we can always get all this information about it. We can also configure it to deliver this somewhere so it's saved. it's going to be saved here unless we go here and delete it, but we can also have this like automatically saved, all this information somewhere if we need it. So let's go back again into our pipeline. And now I can say here, for example, scheduled runs. Oh, okay. Triggers, okay. Not from here. So first we will have to, if you want to have to create a scheduled run, we will have to disable continuous integration. And then the script will, or the run will ignore the first line saying run it on change of the master branch, and then we will be able to we will be able to create a schedule. So that's done from here. And you can see, I can say override the YAML continuous integration trigger, and then disable continuous integration, and then I can add schedule, and then from here I can say run it every day at 3 o'clock or something like that. Right? You get the picture. And now if I click save here, this is going to be basically when the script will be executed. We don't care about that now, so I'm just going to skip to everything. Let's go back. And the next thing I want to show is how to add a PowerShell task. And adding a PowerShell task is also very easy. I go here in the list of tasks. This may be hidden, so you have to show it. And type PowerShell. And now I have few tasks here that are related to PowerShell. And as you can see, I can run Azure CLI. I can run Azure Functions. I can run Azure PowerShell, which is basically a PowerShell with all the Azure modules pre-installed. And then I can select a normal PowerShell task. One important thing, once I click this and start configuring it and click add, it's going to come here or show up here in the pipeline at the place where I have my cursor. You see, it's here. If I click it here and then click add, it's going to add that code in the middle of this word. So be careful where you put your mouse before you click add in the task. And what's the difference in here and in here? Tasks gives us a little bit more control, or actually a lot more control. First, we can say if we want a file path or inline. Let's say inline for now, because I don't have a file that I can use. So we are going to create an inline again, and this is automatically a multi-line, so I don't have to keep it in one line. This is automatically going to be, it's called inline, but it's automatically going to be a multi-line script. Then I have an error action preference that I can choose. It's important to master working with errors in Azure DevOps, because that's a very useful tool if you are planning to fail some tests based on some value, or based on, I don't know, not being able to execute something without error. And if you don't want to continue, then you have to work with those errors. So in the list of jobs, one of the jobs will fail. And if it fails, then it means that your build or run of your Azure pipeline is not functional. Okay. So then we have another things that we can configure from here. Again, related to errors. And then we have option to use PowerShell Core. If you are Linux or Mac, then you don't need to tick this box, it will automatically use Core. But if you are on a Windows, as we now, then you have option and you can choose, okay? And then you have working directory. And something that I didn't mention is that every time that when this code is checked on checked in on a container or in a build agent, you get a few directories that you can use here inside of the pipeline as a variables. And one of them is, for example, build directory. And if you want to change that, then you can, of course, put a different directory here. That all depends on your workflow. So I'm going to add this task. And as you can see here, it created a task for us. Again, this task doesn't have a display name. So I'm going to add it. Task number 1. But what I really want to show you is how to run a PowerShell script, right? That's the also important thing. And then I think that most of you will be using it, is to run your own script that you already wrote, that you already have tested, and you just want to run it in a free container, free computing power for you to execute your. All right, so I'm going to save this, and it's now going to run it automatically because we saved it, but that's okay. We go back to repos, and I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be a PowerShell script. I could have uploaded a file here, some existing script. So what would you typically write? I don't know, installing modules. Right, so this makes sense. This will be a script, for example, and I can even like do that. So let's say here, let's do that. Or yeah, why not? Okay, so I created a script that is doing all those lovely things. And I have a file now. And now I go back to my, okay, and you can see it's running because again, the trigger was that if I make a change, the script will run. So let's take a look on that run. You see it's queue. In the queue, we don't have parallel jobs, but we can, as I said, order extra parallel jobs and have things run in a parallel. Now we are waiting. Also, since the COVID situation started in some regions, Azure ran out of resources. And for example, for us in Europe, it was very difficult. We had a time when like we couldn't even create a VM or start existing VM. The Azure was full. And also that had impact, of course, here that sometimes when you have to run a container, it takes time, you have to wait. But usually it's very quick. Okay, so it's running. We saw it before, it's running again the same thing, except that we now have a PowerShell task that we didn't see before, but it was a simple task and you can see it wrote those 2 lines. And it used PowerShell because in our task, we didn't say that we want to use a core, so, okay. We don't have here use PowerShell core. Right, so I'm going to create another task, the same, very similar, but it's going to be file path. And the file is my script ps1. Arguments. So arguments are basically the arguments that we want to pass to our script. And that's now I'm getting to possibility to work with variables. In Azure Pipeline, you can work with variables. You can create the variables. You can define variables directly here in the pipeline in this way. You would like to do that on top, right? And my first variable is going to be, sorry, like this, name. I can even have group. So it's going to be a name, test1, and value. Right, and so I created a variable that I can pass here as an argument in this script. I don't have it in a script, so I don't need to pass it because it's not expecting it, but you get the point, right? Error action can be silently continue. I'm not going to use PowerShell core this time because we want to work with the Active Directory module, and we all know that there is no Active Directory in the PowerShell core. So I'm going to do it like this. I should add it here, and here's my task. Again, I'm missing display name. Type, okay. And that's it. Now I added execution of my script inside of the Azure Pipeline. So this is my identity management script. I want to create new users. So that's an example, right? Identity management. But if we want to really do that, it's not going to work because for my identity management, I need to, for example, get access from Azure Key Vault, where I have username and password of that particular user or identity that can run identity management, that can connect to Azure AD and do the things, right? So in the real world, I wouldn't just run this. In the real world, I would add here something like a Key Vault, and this will be another task that will connect to Key Vault in my subscription, and I can here select a subscription. I can authenticate subscription, and then select the particular Key Vault and select the secrets that I want to download. And the task will be here before that. And during this task, I will get the secrets from my Key Vault, and then I will pass those secrets to my PowerShell script in a form of parameters, so I can access those secrets from my script, right? I don't want to have username and password directly in my script. I want to use Azure Key Vault. So that's another task that you can use. Then, for example, my source file with the identities, if I'm not using some kind of API that I can also use here and connect to it, but if I don't, then it's, for example, a CSV file from HR. And for that, I can go here and create a SFTP connection, download the SFTP or file from SFTP to here, and then inside of my script, I will load the file and read it and then create those identities, right? Or things like that. So the whole pipeline is basically the list of build tasks, and I can create them here. Of course, I can do all of those things inside of my PowerShell directly, but the power of pipeline is that it already knows how to do those things. And I can use the pipeline to do those things for me, and I don't have to do everything inside of the PowerShell. So it's another tool for us, the create automation tool for us that we can use and work with the things. So that's another example. I'm going to save this now and run it so we can see how this script is executed. And Right. Maybe it's worth mentioning. So now, if I go back to pipelines, you will see, oh, it failed. Okay, so something was wrong. Mapping values are not allowed in this context. I have no idea what that means. But we can see that it's line 14. So I did a mistake somewhere. Let's see. Oh, yeah. I didn't put, okay, I don't need that. I didn't put the quotation mark. I should put the double quotes for the value of the variable. Don't need that because we didn't use it. Okay, so run it again. And let's see. Didn't fail immediately in a syntax. But again, yeah, I would typically have, like, for example, I use also Azure pipelines to, every time I make a change in some module that I have, and I have that I want to upload that module to PowerShell gallery, right? So I have Azure pipeline in which when I commit something to the repository, then it runs automatically. PowerShell script analyzer on the code I wrote, then it runs, that's one script. Then it runs Pester. I don't know if you're using Pester. Again, another test, check my code. And if everything is okay and as expected, then it goes and uploads the module to PowerShell gallery. Saves a lot of time. Okay, right. So we are now back with our job run. And here are also some information that you can find. You can see actually in which folder physically on that Windows station it was running, where it was, and so on. I'm going to come back to that so we don't waste too much time. We are already over 1 hour limit. Just quickly, I wanted to show you here in the pipelines. If you want to work with those variables, you can also create them here. You can create a variable group that you can create manually. You can also give access to specific pipeline or give it to all pipelines. And you can also link secrets from Key Vault. So you can get those in here and have them here pre-downloaded for you from the Key Vault. So you don't have to do that necessarily from your pipeline. You can also do it here basically graphically. And then in your Key Vault, once you authenticate, you see it will ask me to select, then it will ask me to authenticate, then it will ask me to select the Key Vault name. And then I will be able to select individual secrets. And I can also have them here and then work with them as variables that are accessible by name, right? So that was another thing that I wanted to show you. We can see green, perfect. It took it 24 seconds to complete. And we can see that it was completed. We can see PowerShell task 2, right? So I didn't get any information about the installation of the module. But you can see that my script was executed, and I probably should have put verbose on it, so I would see the I would see that the module was installed. But I can see that the script PS1 was installed. It wrote what I was supposed to write, and that means that the task was completed and it was checked out. Okay. So I can continue probably much longer than this. There are a few things that we still didn't cover, but I think you all get like the big picture of why using Azure DevOps for PowerShell is very useful, and I use it every day. But again, it's not what DevOps is about. And I'm not a developer, so for me that was all new. I just recently actually completed Azure DevOps certification, and for that I learned much more about like DevOps practices and tools and other things about agile development and so on. But for me, even though we are not using it for that purpose, I find out this little set of tools that we have here very, very useful. And in everyday tasks, even if you are collaborating with someone, maybe it's worth mentioning that you can have 5 people in a team for free to work with you on this. If you want to add more people, then there are options to use like Visual Studio subscriptions, or I think it's $5-6 per month per additional user. So you can add an entire team here. You can all use Azure boards for collaborate, to manage some projects, and you can all execute your code in pipelines, save the results in artifacts and so on. What you would typically like use Azure DevOps is definitely if you are working with Azure, if you have files, for example, in Azure storage somewhere, it's very easy to connect to Azure storage from here directly from a pipeline and download file, upload files. Maybe you want to save your log files, so you run the script writes a bunch of logs. And so what do you do with them? The moment the script finish, the moment there is a checkout, which you saw in here, that container is gone, right? Another thing important, at this moment, finalizing job, it's deleting your container. So all those temporary files you created, they are gone. So you can export them as artifacts, and then they will be available from here. You can click and download. Or you can, of course, save your logs and maybe send them by email or upload them to Azure storage account. Very easy. You can use a task for that, or you can use like Azure CLI, or you can even use like PowerShell, because there are all those commandlets that you can use to upload it to a storage account. I'm just thinking, okay. I think that's all I wanted to cover today. I don't know if there are any questions. No one raised their hands. But if you have any questions, please, now it's time to ask. No?
I'll say it's an interesting way to orchestrate it. I haven't played with it like that before. I think that's going to be helpful with a project that I'm starting to build a proof of concept for.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's mainly just deploying. I have a massive DSC configuration that takes, an hour or two to apply, and I'm trying to chunk it out into multiple components. And I think this will probably be a good way to do it, and just have multiple release pipelines for each component.
Right, that's possible. I was also working with the desired state configuration directly from here, from Azure DevOps. And for that kind of things, it's very useful tool. Okay.
Well, if we don't have any questions from anyone else, then I'll say thank you very much, Vuki, for your talk. Enjoyed it very much.
You're welcome. Okay. All right.
Thanks everyone
for having me. And thanks everyone for joining and for keeping till the end. And have a great day then.
Thanks everyone. We'll send out a link for a recording as soon as